climate change is increasing the severity and the frequency of these fires. We now have a new classification of fire intensity, which is catastrophic, which we have never had before. The terrible fires in Eastern Australia that you mentioned covered a much, much greater area than fires in the past have ever covered. And for the first time ever, they burned rainforest. And that is totally new for Australia. So I would say, yes, they are unprecedented. Climate change due to global warming is playing a substantial role, and we really need to act fast. We're running out of time. An Australian classification, I can't answer for the rest of the world, but we now know from the firefighters who faced up to the terrible fires of that summer that they considered that these fires are unstoppable. And really, a large part of Sydney would have been wiped out if the wind hadn't changed in the last minute after one of the most huge fires that came down from the Blue Mountains just stopped in time to avoid essentially wiping out northern Sydney. So we're facing a new situation, and climate change is one of the vital drivers of this new severity and intensity and frequency of these fires. It should be coming into policy decisions because some people feel that some of the towns and villages in the forested areas should not really exist and that people should move. And really, people have responded in different ways to the fires. Some people are trying to rebuild in the same places. Other people are leaving these areas. And there are also financial incentives for local government to encourage as much housing development as possible in their areas because they get paid rates, income from housing in those areas. And it's the same with floodplains that you alluded to, that people are building in floodplains where they shouldn't really be building. And it could be mentioned, really, that in Australia, after the terrible fires, we then had floods. And floods are also partly driven by climate change because as the atmosphere becomes warmer, it holds more water. And then when it does rain, it can rain much more heavily than previously. And so we can get floods coming along also as partly caused by global climate change. So it's going to get worse before it gets better. And yes, there are solutions. 3/4 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions come from burning fossil fuels. And we now have most of the technologies we need to move away from fossil fuels to renewable energy and efficient energy use. Wind and solar are really much cheaper than fossil fuels and nuclear power in the vast majority of the world, and they're still getting cheaper. So we know that these technologies, together with some additional storage and some additional transmission lines, can substitute for fossil fuels. So the first thing is to transition all electricity to renewables, and then to transit, and at the same time to move our transport from oil-driven cars and trucks to electric cars and trucks. It is happening with electricity generation very quickly in many parts of the world now. And for example, in one of our states, South Australia, 60% of annual electricity generation comes from wind and sun already. Okay. And similarly in Denmark, the vast majority of electricity generation comes from the wind, with some agricultural wastes used to produce bioenergy. And Scotland also has the vast majority of its electricity generation already coming from renewables, mostly wind. I'm optimistic that we'll implement the technologies we need to transform the energy system, for example, but I'm pessimistic that it will occur too late to stop even greater climate change. And the reason it's occurring so late is because the existing industries, the fossil fuel industries, the forestry industry, and other industries that have a vested interest in continuing with business as usual are fighting and resisting the change.
Okay.